Good morning and welcome to the Strategic Forces Subcommittee hearing on fiscal year 2018 priorities and posture of the national security space enterprise. We're honored to have a panel of expert witnesses who are leaders in our national security space program to join us here today. And before I introduce them, though, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that while I can't imagine there being a better place to work than for the Strategic Forces Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee, apparently somebody thinks there's a better job on Washington, D.C. This will be the last hearing that Steve Katay will be in his current position. He's leaving us to go to work for the Secretary of Defense, be the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. And our loss is the Secretary's gain. So we're going to miss him. He's been with us a long time, does a great job, but I know he'll do a great job for our country in his new capacity as well. So good luck, buddy. All right, today we have some witnesses that are very familiar to this committee and do a great job for our country. General John J. Raymond, Commander, Air Force Space Command, Lieutenant General David Buck, Commander, Joint Functional Component Command for Space, Ms. Betty Sapp, Director of National Reconnaissance Office, and Robert Cardillo, Director of National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Say what? Oh. Mr. John Hill, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense and Space Policy. And after we finish this unclassified testimony and questions and answers, we'll adjourn to a closed session to continue our oversight in an appropriately secure fashion. In Secretary Mattis's confirmation hearing in front of the Senate earlier this year, his official testimony stated, quote, "While our military maintains capable air, land, and sea forces, the cyber and space domains now demand an increasing share of our attention and investment," close quote. And I fully agree with the Secretary's statement. Our military and intelligence leaders have been clear in their warnings, some going back many years, that our use of space could be taken away from us in the next military conflict. However, we have not moved with the conviction and urgency to respond to these warnings, and this has left us with a growing crisis to confront in outer space. While I have the full faith and confidence in each of our expert witnesses here today, I do not have faith in the tangled bureaucratic structure that they must work with. Meanwhile, China, for example, is advancing rapidly in space and counterspace and has established a new military organization to focus its space, cyber, and electronic warfare capabilities. Dr. John Hamre, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, eloquently stated in an earlier hearing to this subcommittee, quote, "We are not well organized to deal with the new challenges we face in space. The old structure may have been sufficient when space was an uncontested area of operations. That time has passed." Again, I couldn't agree more. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the least capable our adversaries will be in space, and now is the time for reform, even if it's disruptive today. With that, I look forward to hearing all your perspectives on space priorities and posture, and I thank all of you for being here and working with us on this important topic. I now recognize my friend and colleague from Tennessee, the ranking member, Mr. Jim Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add my note of congratulations to Steve. Well done. And I thank you for this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate especially your focus on strengthening America's space capabilities. There is no more important goal. There are many issues before us and before the Air Force in particular, but I'm glad we're addressing them in a bipartisan, joint, and substantive fashion. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses.
Great. I now recognize our witnesses. The witnesses were asked to summarize their prepared statements will be submitted for the record without objection, so ordered. If you could take your statements and keep them to 5 minutes or less so we can get to questions, that'd be awesome. General Raymond, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper. Let me also pile on and say congratulations to Steve Katay. We look forward to having you sitting here next to us next year. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you as the Commander of Air Force Space Command. It's my distinct privilege to lead and represent nearly 36,000 professional and dedicated airmen providing resilient and affordable space and cyberspace capabilities for the joint force and our nation. It's also a distinct privilege to testify with my friends and panel of experts and close partners. This is a very exciting year for both the Air Force and Air Force Space Command. In 2017, September of 2017, our Air Force celebrates our 70th birthday, and Air Force Space Command celebrates our 35th birthday, although as an Air Force, we've been involved in space since 1954, and since the beginning. We've come a long way and done a remarkable job integrating space capabilities into joint warfighting. Today, there is nothing we do, and I repeat, nothing we do as a joint force that isn't enabled by space. Integration has been our strength. Nevertheless, we find ourselves at the intersection of high reliance and vulnerability in the space domain. Today, in no uncertain terms, space is a warfighting domain just like air, land, and sea. Potential adversaries are developing capabilities to deny us access to and the benefits of the space domain. Let me be very clear. We do not want a conflict that extends into space, but one way to keep that from happening is to make sure that we're prepared for it and be able to fight and win that conflict if it were to occur. I think it shouldn't be lost on anybody that our space program is the envy of the world. My near-term priorities are fourfold. First, in partnership with Betty Sapp, is to operationalize the National Space Defense Center and provide them with a command and control capability necessary to operate in a contested domain. Secondly, we must improve space situational awareness, transforming from a cataloging focus to a warfighting focus required of this domain. Third, we need to transition our space architecture into a defendable space architecture to provide resilient and defendable capabilities for the current strategic environment that we face. And finally, we need to continue to professionally develop Air Force Space Command Airmen. I thank you for your support. I thank you for your active leadership, and look forward to continuing to work closely with you in the years ahead. And I also look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes General Buck.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your steadfast support of our men and women in uniform, the space enterprise, and this nation. As this committee is well aware, we've turned an educational corner of sorts. It's now widely acknowledged that space is critical to our way of life. This, coupled with an understanding of the compelling and compounding threats to our freedom of action in space, is the burning platform to evolve our national security space enterprise. We don't need a clean slate approach, but certainly an overhaul is necessary to guarantee our freedoms in, through, and from space. This is a challenge because our national security space architecture and processes were largely conceived to provide services or commodities during an era when our most significant co-orbital threat was debris. Given the emerging threats, we no longer approach space with simply a service provider mentality. A foremost responsibility is to gain and maintain space superiority. This is a prerequisite to protecting and defending the Space Joint Operating Area and for providing Space Force combat engagement with the joint forces across the globe. Over the past year, we've made substantial progress, especially with respect to all domain operations and our ability to protect and defend the national security space enterprise. We are better warfighters. There are, however, areas that require continued focus and vigilance. We must continue to normalize operations across the enterprise. This includes space situational awareness, as well as improving foundational intelligence and the ability to provide robust indications and warning. We also must continue the full court press to deliver a next-generation battle space awareness and command and control capability. At the same time, we must review and update the associated authorities and rules of engagement for operations in space. And we must continue to push on fielding required capabilities on operationally relevant timelines. Looking forward, we are focused on maintaining freedom of action in space. It is an imperative of our joint force. As a learning organization, we will continue to review and mature our approaches and organizational structures. We can accept no less because the speed and complexity of future fights demands operationally agile organizations. Every challenge is an opportunity, and we have many opportunities in space. Freedom of action in space is not a birthright. It must be secured and it must be preserved. This requires constant vigilance, strong partnerships, and active participation. I thank the committee for your leadership and for your advocacy. I look forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you, General Buck. Ms. Sapp, you're recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO. The NRO is responsible for developing, acquiring, launching, and operating the nation's overhead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance architecture. We are the foundation of the U.S. global situational awareness. We contribute to global intelligence, military, and homeland security operations, while simultaneously assisting with the formation of national policy and achieving diplomatic goals. We provide direct support to U.S. warfighters, help protect U.S. borders, and contribute significantly to the fight against ISIS and other counterterrorism operations worldwide. The foundation of NRO mission capabilities and contributions are our people. Our people are behind every mission success and enable the direct support we provide to the combatant commands, their service and functional components, and deployed tactical units. The NRO workforce is not just dedicated to mission, but talented and empowered to innovate. We instill a culture of innovation and risk tolerance in everything we do. NRO innovation comes in many forms to include using existing capabilities differently, developing new apps for our space and ground systems, and developing the new capabilities critical to closing intelligence gaps. We're also working with our mission partners to ensure we fully leverage commercial products, services, and capabilities. The NRO is a small, flat, end-to-end organization fully capable of successfully delivering an increasingly capable, integrated, resilient, and affordable architecture. We have control of every function required, from the R&D that enables us to stay ahead of targets and threats, to the acquisition of new space and ground capability, to the operations required to use, adapt, and upgrade those capabilities to respond to new and changing mission imperatives in the field. We're performing extremely well. All 15 of our major system acquisitions are green, meaning they are meeting or exceeding cost, schedule, and performance metrics. This year, we received our 8th consecutive clean financial management audit, demonstrating our ability to properly manage all resources entrusted to us. And we continue to improve our collection capabilities and the resiliency to stay ahead of targets and threats. But staying ahead of the adversaries who threaten our space capabilities is a challenge. Those adversaries are making space a priority, investing heavily and accepting the risks necessary for rapid progress. The U.S. has not been keeping pace. I believe we have not made the investment that would indicate space as a priority or fundamental to the U.S. Our requirements, budget, and acquisition processes are disconnected, and none of them moves quickly. Failure is not well tolerated, even in the research and development activities required to keep our space capabilities relevant and vital, or to improve their resiliency. National security space is a team sport, and everyone on the team, those in the executive branch and in the Congress, must do all they can to advance its capabilities and improve its resilience to threats. We must have processes that are integrated, that move faster, and that demonstrate greater risk tolerance. We must recommit to space as a national priority and imperative. This committee has been out in front trying to drive the changes required. The NRO is inspired by this committee's efforts to address the barriers to change and the pace of change required to advance national security space. The NRO and the broader national space community have people with the talent, commitment, and passion necessary to take us forward. We only need to empower and enable them to succeed. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support of the National Reconnaissance Office, its people, and its mission.
Thank you, Ms. Sapp. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Cardillo for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the committee, I too am pleased to testify before you here today with my distinguished colleagues and as a member of the team of national security professionals. NGA is the primary provider of geospatial intelligence, or GEOINT, for the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. Our support to military services, combatant commands, and warfighters includes safety to navigation, precise targeting, disaster recovery, and tailored intelligence support, just to name a few. I also have the job of being the functional manager for the National System of Geospatial Intelligence, and I strengthen the overall enterprise by ensuring that those combatant command needs are met through future overhead architectures. More specifically, the Geo and Enterprise Capability Document, which serves as the framework to translate those needs into the key enterprise functions and capabilities that our analysts require to resolve our most vexing intelligence challenges. Now, Global Persistent GEOINT provides an architecture to monitor these intelligence challenges, enables NGA to provide national and tactical leaders the intelligence and early warning needed for decision advantage. It leverages the exquisite capabilities of the National Reconnaissance Office to allow the combatant commands to hold strategic targets at risk. It also integrates the capabilities of our international partners to fill gaps in our enterprise. Now, the explosion of data has driven the GEOINT discipline beyond the limits of human interpretation and explanation. By combining all of the data now available to us and to use with the use of algorithms, automated processing, machine-to-machine learning, and artificial intelligence, we believe we can automate as much as 75% or more of the rote tasks we perform today. This will free our analysts to spend more time on and focus on those hard intelligence problems. Getting to that point will require significant investments in our IT architecture, as well as in our research and development. Not only is that data exploding, conservative estimates over the next 10 years predict that over 9,000 commercial satellites will be launched, compared to fewer than 1,500 in the last 10 years. Accordingly, NGA will partner with the NRO to engage with and access the most mature of these new space via the commercial GEOINT activity. Through it, we will identify and evaluate emerging commercial GEOINT data and services against those needs that we capture and maintain. In closing, the national security space enterprise is vital to NGA's ability to provide advantage to warfighter commanders and policymakers, to give them the decision space and the operational time they need to do their job. Timely, relevant, and accurate GEOINT is only possible through the combined efforts of the IC, the Department of Defense, emerging industry, and allied partners. I'm happy to address any questions you might have, and I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cardillo. Mr. Hill, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today here with my distinguished colleagues. In the months ahead, understanding and addressing the implications of the growing threats in space is critical as this administration prepares the President's new national security strategy and the National Defense Strategy, and as Congress carries out its responsibilities for oversight and funding of the programs and activities necessary to realize those strategies. No less important, strategic success requires increased resources, an end to defense budget caps, an end to the years-long pattern of extended continuing resolutions, and a return to strategy-focused resourcing. Today, we consider space security in an era when Russia and China present anti-access area denial strategies intended to prevent or counter U.S. intervention in crises or conflicts, and to undercut our ability to secure our interests. Diplomatic solutions remain our preferred option to settling the differences that divide nations. But American diplomatic influence rests on the credibility and capability of our military power, which is fundamental to deterrence and to the confidence of our allies in knowing that they do not have to submit to the coercive pressures of large and powerful neighbors. America's space posture underwrites deterrence by enabling the U.S. military to project power globally, respond to crises rapidly, strike swiftly and precisely, and command forces in multiple theaters simultaneously. Potential adversaries know well our reliance on space systems that many perceive as vulnerable, leading to an unstable situation in which some have concluded that in times of conflict, attacking U.S. military space systems may make an irresistible and most tempting choice. Disabusing them of such misguided notions is a strategic priority. That is why, in the Department of Defense, we are making such a concerted effort to strengthen the mission assurance of our space capabilities and to deny aggressors the benefits of attacks in space. We are changing our investments and operations and increasing our partnering with commercial entities and allies. More importantly, we are changing attitudes by recognizing that space is a warfighting domain and preparing ourselves to deter conflict in space and prevail if deterrence fails. Finally, I want to recognize this committee's priority on strengthening national security space organization, management, and leadership. This question has the attention of the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense. They expect to be presented with sound analysis and a full range of options, and they mean for us to meet the deadline of reporting to Congress this June. In conclusion, I want to thank this committee for keeping the challenges of securing space before the public. I look forward to working together to ensure that we have the right strategy and resources and the necessary programs, posture, and organizational structures to sustain deterrence, to prevail if deterrence fails, and to increase the incentives nations have to settle their differences by peaceful means. Thank you. And I would add, as the person acting in the job that Mr. Kate will be doing, nobody is happier to have him coming to the defense than I am. Thank you.
I hear you. All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. I'll recognize myself first for questions. And this would be a question for anybody that's willing to swing at it. We passed a law about 10 years ago that directed how the operationally responsive space office would be run. And I've heard that instead of being streamlined, ORS options are still forced to go through the traditional Pentagon processes, including the Defense Space Council. So rather than a small number of decision makers focused on moving fast with respect to operationally responsive requirements and acquisition, the recent decision meeting of the ORS program included over 60 attendees, with 54 more than we had envisioned. To me, this is an example. This example is indicative of the extremely fragmented space organization and bureaucratic kudzu, my word. You got to be from the South to know what kudzu is. That comes in and strangles out the life of the DoD space programs. It's a situation where everyone can say no, but no one can say yes. So how do we fix that? General Raymond won't swing first.
I'll swing first. I'm familiar with
I
cuts.
recognize that.
Chairman, thanks for the question. 60 people were not involved in that decision. As you stated, the ORS XCOM in the law is pretty clear. There's six ORS XCOM members by law. The PDSA has the ability to designate others that are critical to that decision. In this case, I wasn't in the room, but my understanding is that those 6 were the voting members plus 2 or 3 others. That was it. It's under the framework of a larger DSC, but the decision makers were at the 8 or 9 person level. Those were the voting members, and the decision actually went pretty quick.
Well, I understand that there were 6 voting members, but weren't there 60 people in the room?
Yes, there are 60 people in the room, but there's also some goodness and transparency of having others there. They didn't vote. They didn't influence the decision. They were there, and I'll tell you, after those folks make that decision, a lot of those folks then have to be the ones that go execute that decision and make sure they have a common understanding. So it was a very small number of folks that was consistent with the legislation that was passed for a small, tight decision-making process for ORS XCOM, and I'm pretty comfortable that it was a pretty rapid decision.
Okay, so 6 people were the decision makers.
As I mentioned to you, there were 6 that were by law, and then there was a couple others that were added by the
So there were 8 people, but were
8
decision
or 9. I
makers.
wasn't in the room, but it was small numbers.
Okay, 6 to 8 people. Betty Sapp, do you have to have 6 to 8 people to make decisions on acquisition process programs with your organization?
I have at least 2 people that make decisions, one on the IC side and one on the DoD side. There's a lot of people, as you mentioned, who review the package of documentation for sufficiency before it gets to those decision makers. And again, there's a whole lot of staff on the IC side. There's a whole lot of staff on the OSD, DoD side. So a lot of people look at it before it even gets on the calendar for the decision makers.
The people that look at it, do they have the authority to stop it or say no?
They have the authority to stall it.
Is that the case with the ORS, General Raymond? Those other people, can they slow it down or stop it?
My understanding is that they do not have a vote in that process. They have as by law, the 6 that are by law, and then
How about the lead-up process to get in that room, before it gets in that room for decision-making?
PDSA schedules the Defense Space Council, and it's done relatively routinely. It was done pretty quickly in this process, and I didn't sense a slowdown in this.
Okay. Anybody else want to swing at it? All right.
Chairman, I'll give you a comment as one of those non-voting people who was in the room.
Okay.
What the principal DoD space advisor also did was she used that to tee up a decision that is also necessary, which is the long-term solution for weather. So ORS is an important gap. The ORS program that was before us, an important gap for what the General Hyten had put forward and had been brought in the Air Force. That went pretty quickly. The discussion also then said to everybody, are we also moving on the requirements process for the longer term, which she used that effectively in that respect.
Great. All right. In the testimony to the SASC earlier this week, General Goldfein talked about the need to integrate space. And the Joint Staff is who is responsible for overall space integration forces. On that Joint Staff, there are 11 Air Force general officers. Of those 11 general officers, how many space professionals are included? Anybody want to guess? Be 0. You know how many are pilots? That would be 9. Now, if we look at the specific combatant commander or command, according to UCOM, there are over 28,000 Air Force personnel supporting UCOM. And how many of those 28,000 are dedicated to workspace issues? That would be 2. We do need to integrate space. I completely agree with General Goldfein on that with its air and our land and sea and cyber obligations. That's what combatant commanders do. But they're also designed to fight and win wars in a joint manner. So, General Buck, how do we integrate space capabilities better into our war plans and combatant commands? To me, that starts with people, and I'm interested in your perspective.
Well, thank you. I agree with you. I would like to get more space officers, general officers on the Joint Staff, but the Chief's very focused on developing joint officers, and I think that's a focus area for us as well. You know, when we look across the enterprise, you look at United States Strategic Command, we have 2 space officers working in joint jobs at U.S. Strategic Command. I'm in a joint billet myself as Commander JFCC Space. The way I serve as my JSPOC Operations Center at Vandenberg serves as Space Coordinating Authority for the combatant commands. So they have reach back authority back to get those space effects out to theater. As far as developing joint operations, General Raymond, I think that we're doing a pretty good job, and that's a focus area as we go forward.
I would say, Jim Rogers, you bring up a great point. The challenges that we face as a nation today are, trans-regional, if not global, multi-domain, multifunctional. They're not confined to a line on a map. It's not just one geographic commander's responsibility. It's pretty much all the combatant commander's responsibility. Each combatant commander has what's called a coordinating authority for space. Each of those combatant commanders has delegated that authority down to the CFAX, or the air component of that. In the air components around the globe, we probably have a senior space officer called the Director of Space Forces. We have, and General Goldfein testified to this, he was the space coordinating authority at CENTCOM at the time. We have a senior space officer called the Director of Space Forces. He has a staff of about 5, and then in every single division in the AOC, we have space professionals embedded in those divisions. So what we have done is prioritize putting the weight of effort in those AOCs where the combatant commander has designated that authority to. And that's where we do that multi-domain integration work. That's the hub of that multi-domain integration work.
You mentioned that General Goldfein at one time was the space advisor.
He was no, sir. He was the CFAC, the Air Force's component commander for CENTCOM, and in that role, the CENTCOM commander delegates to him the authority called the Space Coordinating Authority. And his AOC, where he operated out of, is that multi-domain center that integrates air, space, and cyber into that fight. And that's where we focus a significant portion of our space operators.
General Buck, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I will say that probably in CENTCOM, we have the preponderance of space officers in CENTCOM right now. That's our weight of effort. And if you look at CENTCOM right now, in the Director of Space Force office, we probably have 8, maybe 10 space officers in the Director of Space Force offices there. But it's a real win for us when not just we have a Director of Space Force office there. But when we embed space officers in ISRD and COD and CPD, that's a win when we start not being an add-on, but we're baked into the processes over there, and I think we're doing better. Our focus right now is on CENTCOM, but I tell you, sir, we're getting better in PACOM and UCON and across the board.
Great. Thank you. Chair recognizes the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to focus in my questioning on how crowded space is and how it's going to get a lot crowded, more crowded. Mr. Cardillo mentioned in his testimony on page 5 that in the last 10 years we saw something like 1,500 satellites go up, but in the next 10 years, something like 9,000. That is 2.5 satellites a day going up in space. That's amazing. But we've seen launches like in India recently, they put up 100 sats just in one launch. So as space gets more crowded, it gets more treacherous. General Buck mentioned in his testimony, it used to be the main threat we faced was debris. Now we face traffic, we may face threats. So I'm particularly interested in this idea of the non-military space traffic management. And I understand, General Raymond, you've embarked on a pilot program with the FAA on that?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cooper. We have. As I've testified before to this panel, I share your concern. Space is clearly congested and contested, but in this case, on the congested side, General Buck and his team track 23,000 objects a day, take about 400,000 observations a day to keep track of all that, act as the space traffic control for the world, and keep the domain safe for all. It's very important, and I think General Buck will agree to me, I'll pass it to him here, but it's very important for national security purposes that we have the ability to have radars, to task those radars, to collect the data from those radars, to be able to maintain the awareness that we need for that domain. However, I don't think we need to be the organization that makes the notifications around the world and acts as the traffic cop. So I've met with the FAA administrator a couple months ago and asked if he would join us in developing a pilot program, if you will, to see if we could inform this going forward. General Buck has the lead on pulling that together, and Dave, if you want to give an update of where we are.
Thank you, General Raymond. I'm really proud of the team, how far we've come with the FAA. I've talked to Dr. Neal directly, and we have agreed jointly to begin that pilot program. I expect that pilot program to begin in this summer, probably August timeframe. I do agree with General Raymond. There are some aspects of space traffic management that are not inherently military, and we could load shed them to a civil agency. Things, safety of flight, debris management, norms of behavior. I don't think those are inherently military. I think it's important to make a distinction, too, between what is space traffic management and what is space situational awareness. For me, as a warfighter, what I need is space situational awareness. I need to know what an object is, where it's going, what its capabilities are, what its vulnerabilities are, those types of things. What I don't need to be doing, I don't think, are things like notifications for a conjunction assessment and norms of behavior, and I think that's better suited for a civil agency, and I think that's where we're going, sir.
Let me add some color to your remarks. General Raymond said in a very calm fashion, we keep space safe or something like that. We are protecting other countries' billion-dollar satellites from a piece of shrapnel that might be traveling at 33,000 miles an hour but could destroy the machine. And for that, we get not even a thank you note. It's kind of amazing that we provide this magnificent worldwide service and little appreciation. Plus, as you said, when we consider load shedding, it's a burden on our folks that doesn't necessarily need to be borne by them.
Other people, not all countries, some countries do send us thank you notes, talk a lot more to us, others don't. We're really doing it because we want to keep the space domain safe for all to use, including us. And so that's the emphasis around, behind that. We need to be able to operate in space, and it's our way of helping to make sure that we can do that.
But it's also an essential truth-telling function. Like if you look at the downing of the Malaysian airliner over the Ukraine, there was a worldwide debate and dispute over what caused that plane to crash. And even though we have excellent air traffic control in most parts of the world, there was still a significant dispute. And when it comes to separating news from fake news and propaganda, you know, I think in the space domain, it would be nice if we established a sort of gold standard of truth so that we would know if it was debris, if we would know if it was something less benign than that. So I'm worried that, while I hope the pilot program gets off to a good start this summer, I hope it will soon be able to establish a standard, but even with air traffic, we're having difficulty isolating causes when it should be, with all of our plane radars and things like that, an easier thing to prove than it is in space. So I hope we will get on that task. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lamborn for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for the great service that you provide for our country. And General Raymond, I'm going to follow up on a question we touched on in our conversation yesterday. With BMC2, I remain concerned about the prospect of repeating the same mistakes we made with JMS, whereby lab prototypes and custom government development efforts were prioritized over utilizing proven commercial capabilities, which unfortunately led to huge scheduling and cost overruns. Can I get your commitment that you will prioritize the utilization of commercial capabilities to the maximum extent practicable first, and then fill in with government development for the truly unique military requirements that don't reside in the commercial marketplace?
I'm a big proponent of commercial data. I've said for many years in front of this committee that we need all sources of data. We need data from commercial all the way up to the high-end intelligence data. And on what our strategy going forward on the battle management command and control system that you reference is to do just that, is to use commercial companies in a consortium to help us develop those requirements. It's analogous to the iPhone. You get the iPhone and then you have apps. And we want to have open standards and open consortium so all players can play in feeding us that data, and to do so quickly. We have to get it on the floor. We have to get it in the National Space Defense Center as quick as we possibly can. Therefore, what we did was we switched the program, and I gave that to the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, who has already done this. They have already taken the capability, built an open architected system, has a consortium approach, and it has worked very well. So we're fast forwarding this capability by giving it to the folks that can move rapidly, that have already done it in another capability in the air domain. And what this will allow us to do is also get at that multi-domain integration. So the whole purpose of this program going forward is to enable a lot of commercial data and other source data to be integrated to give General Buck the data that he needs to have to do the mission that he's responsible for.
If I could just make a comment along that same lines. Ranking Member Cooper stressed the importance of domain awareness. It's really important that we ingest non-traditional data into our space surveillance network as well. That's a hard thing to do, but we're making progress. And I think this summer sometime we're going to bring on a capability called a non-traditional data preprocessor that will begin to allow ingestion of commercial data into our space surveillance network. So I think that's a move in the right direction for domain awareness and non-traditional ingestion, like commercial sensors, if you will.
Okay, thank you both. Changing gears, I've heard some rumors about insufficient funding for GPS-3 in the fiscal year 18 request. What are we doing to keep this important program on track?
Yeah, so, Congressman, we have not submitted the 18 budget going forward. We have, in my opinion, a pretty healthy GPS constellation in that we've got 31 operational satellites on orbit. We actually have 37 on orbit, 31 are operational. We are moving forward, although with the OCX program, although that is, as many folks have testified previously, would not be the model program that we would hold up as the standard. And we are clearly not out of the woods yet, and I won't be comfortable until that capability is operational on the ops floor for General Buck's team to be able to operate. So I'm pretty comfortable where we are with a relatively healthy GPS constellation that's on orbit and progress being made on the ground control system.
What does that mean for the budget for next year?
The budget's going to be released next week, and so I'd prefer not to speculate on what might be released in the budget until that gets released.
Okay. And Ms. Sapp, in 40 seconds, I'm going to give you a huge question, but you referred to how we don't have the commitment we need for space going forward. What can we do better as a country to show that commitment and that resolve?
I think we really need help on the budget side, not just investment in space, but the ability to use the investment. As we're fielding new things to improve our resiliency, it's very hard to move ahead with new things under a continuing resolution. It's not allowed. So that is just slowing the pace of progress, even after we get it out of the executive branch, which is no mean feat. So you can help a lot on that front.
Thank you so much.
I would echo that as well on behalf of Air Force Space Command.
Thank you.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for any questions he may have.
I'm going to forgo the usual GPS backup. I assume that's moving along, and if not, there'll be a piece of legislation that'll move it along perhaps even faster. Not exactly sure how far to go with this. I represent Beale Air Force Base. There are certain activities going on. I'm not sure we should be talking about them here, but I would like to take that up because I think it integrates with most of what's being discussed here. Just in general, the integration of information from a variety of sources, I think this is something that is happening. Just in general, your views on that progress?
In general, I think it's going really well, and in fact, is largely the model that I use to make the decision to go with the approach that we talked about in the battle management command and control conversation we just had with Congressman Lamborn. I'd be more than happy to talk more in the closed session with you.
I think I'll let it go at that point. Oh, no, I have one more. We picked this up yesterday and going on. A plan for the next decade of critical assets that need to be developed and deployed, and the approximate cost of those. I think we need to have a long-term vision here about where we're going to deploy perhaps the most essential asset of all, which is our financial resources. I've not seen such a display of those things that you, the military in general, and certainly the Air Force specifically in the space area, need, want, must have. And I think it's really essential that we look at that. There will be insufficient money for everything, particularly if the tax cuts are real. And so we're going to need to make some tough decisions about prioritization. And that needs a long view, 10 years minimum, so that we can say, okay, these things are going to be funded, those are not, or we're going to fund all of it and not fund something else. So if, Mr. Chairman, if we could move in that direction so we can have that long-term vision.
I'd welcome the opportunity to come back to you and walk you through the space enterprise vision. That's our longer-term vision for space. It's done in very close partnership. It's an integrated vision with the NRO, and I want to take a moment. I do this every time I can, and I'm not just saying this because Betty Sapp is here. Betty Sapp is a huge partner for us.
2 minutes, 8 seconds. Go for it.
But I would be more than welcome to come back and walk you through that vision, walk you through the priorities that as we see them, and inform you on that.
We heard some of this yesterday from General Goldfein about different directions, or at least a different set of priorities for the future. Much of it involves your work, and so I wanted to get a fix on that and other things that we may not put as a priority. So thank you for that. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I really meant you had 2 minutes and 8 seconds to answer.
No, I didn't want to take your time. I wanted to see if you had more questions.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Bridenstine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you think about the consortium, General Raymond, that you talked about for the BMC-2 piece of the National Space Defense Center, that consortium of course, is trying to rapidly develop a capability where we're currently maybe lagging behind. And of course, I think everybody on this committee fully supports that effort. In the meantime, is there an SSA gap that needs to be filled that could be commercial could help with? And maybe General Buck, if you'd like to answer that as well.
Well, thank you, sir. Good seeing you again.
Always.
I mentioned the non-traditional data preprocessor. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think you'll agree with me. The ability to ingest some of those non-traditional, that helps. What also we have is we have SBSS that's online, on orbit right now. That is being extended. The life on that is extended past its, I think the dates are classified, but that's going to be extended. And plus ORS-5, it provides us that gap filler capability as well. So I think those three things together give us the capability to fulfill that gap.
Yeah. Just as a general statement, more data is better. From a South Carolina kudzu guy, more data is better. We need data across the full spectrum, and we do get data across the full spectrum. The other thing that we've done is develop partnerships, and we've got, don't quote me on the numbers, over 50 or 60 different SSA sharing agreements with partners. It's largely a one-way sharing, but there are two-way sharing pieces of that. I'd like to make that stronger when we get the new JMS system up with more capacity and more ability to ingest that data. That will take off, but more is better.
More is better. I'd like to maybe continue on what Ranking Member Cooper was talking about, this effort to create a partnership with the FAA for space situational awareness specifically. Can you share with us how that is being funded, and is it coming out of your budget? Is it coming out of their budget? Is there something Congress should do here to help?
My understanding is there's going to be a FY18 budget request coming out of the FAA, but I'm hesitant to say that because I'm getting in the FAA's lane a little bit. But I think there's a funding request for 18 that's coming out of the FAA, sir. But I don't have the specifics on that.
That's good to hear. And again, I know that's not your lane. I don't want to get you in trouble. But I think this committee would be very supportive of that partnership. Right now, we have heard testimony over and over again how we're providing free situational awareness to the entire world and to all the commercial partners. And at the same time, the tasking that it is imposed on our warfighters at the JSPOC has been problematic to the extent I hear this from some other members of Congress that they want to, and I heard you use the word load shed, they want to load shed the mission, but they don't want to load shed the funding. And I want everybody on this committee to know the Air Force was never funded to provide space situational awareness to the entire world and commercial operators for free. That has not ever been in your mission description, and yet that's what you're doing by default out of the goodness of your hearts. Well, and I say the goodness out of your hearts, but the reality is we need to protect our own assets, and we all know that. So I just want to reiterate the fact that if we can create a space situational awareness environment that can be led by a civilian agency and free your manpower to actually be focused on fighting and winning wars, I think everybody on this panel would fully support that effort. And if we need to do an appropriation, I think that that's something we should be advocating for. So with that, I'll go ahead.
I agree with everything you said. I just also want to make sure that we state the criticality that the national security space mission needs to make sure that they have the space situational awareness.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you that there's a role here for others, but it's critical to our national security that we also maintain the capability to have that awareness.
100%. Air Force must and will always do space situational awareness and, of course, space defense. 100% agree with that. It's the not just the conjunction analysis, but it's the warning that takes a lot of the manpower away from your...
I'm with you.
Okay. All right. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to jump in on this, but given I'm the ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee, on transportation, and we're writing an FAA bill, I guess I'd be reluctant to have the satellite debris tracking dumped on the FAA as well. And you're not saying it's happening, General Buck. You're not saying that. I'm more concerned that Congress gets out over the tips of its skis on this and assigns it without money or help. Rather, negotiating out a solution is a better idea, because I think it probably is a better place for it, in fact. But one question I'm sure the FAA would have, I would have as the ranking member, is what advantage does the FAA get out? What can it get from it, from actually doing the activity, as opposed to just another set of activities?
Yeah, my discussions with Dr. Neild and his staff is that they see this as a real opportunity to do things that are more like air-centric, establishing norms of behavior, establish patterns for safety of flight in space. So they, not to speak for FAA, but my conversations with them have led me to believe that there's goodness, they see some goodness in this, and they're anxious to take on specific aspects of the space traffic management mission.
Yeah, well, that's great, and I look forward to hearing from Dr. Neal and from you at some point. I'll talk to staff here about getting you all together so we can discuss this a little bit. So we have, I wouldn't call it adult oversight on this. I would never accuse us of doing that sometimes, but certainly some oversight, given there's a lot of debate going on right now in the FAA about reorganizing it overall, and tossing this into the mix is, if it's going to get done, putting that in context of all the other things we're trying to do at the FAA is important. That's my main point. Thanks a lot. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, the Air Force has previously expressed that rocket system development is a better way to maintain our dominance in space. Therefore, is it still the Air Force's approach to fund a rocket system versus only rocket components? Would you tell us how you see the government collaborating with industry in funding the rocket system development? What is your vision of how industry should meet the Air Force's evaluation criteria?
Thank you for the questions. The Air Force's strategy remains threefold. First of all, it's critical that we have assured access to space. You have to have that. The second component is that we would like to support competition. We see the benefits of competition in the launch industry. And the third aspect of that is we would like to get off the RD-180 engine. That strategy remains the same. We are investing in launch services. We don't procure rockets. We prefer procure launch services, and that strategy remains the same and is on track.
Thank you, General. General Raymond, I understand that price is an important consideration in any procurement effort, but in my experience, other factors are also important, given the cost of many of the payloads and how essential they are to our national security. Can you discuss how the Air Force evaluates and includes in its procurement decisions qualitative items such as reliability or maintaining the industrial base?
Yeah, all that comes to play. It's not just cost-based. It's a full spectrum analysis. There is a pretty high bar that we go through for certification. We would not put on contract a launch if we didn't think that was going to be assured to get on the space. It's a full range, and it's mission by mission. Some missions are more complex than others.
Okay. Anybody on this could answer this. It is my understanding that the Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRS, is the current and primary method to detect ballistic missile defense threats, and we are dependent on SBIRS. We've been dependent on SBIRS since the 70s. Are there other systems envisioned to complement SBIRS? That may be for the classified brief. How robust are those other systems that supplement SBIRS? How vital is Buckley Air Force Base and SBIRS to our space mission?
Well, let me just say, SBIRS is a national security priority. It provides strategic missile warning for our nation. It's probably one of the most critical systems that we operate. The wing up at Buckley, the 460th Space Wing, led by Colonel Dave Miller, is a premier organization, is extremely critical to the success of that mission area. I was just up there a month or so ago, and they're doing great work. I would, as we look to the future, we look to make the constellations more resilient, and I would have further conversations with you in the closed session to get into more specifics.
General Buck, in your testimony, you referenced the transition of training our satellite officers from a technician-based focus to a warfighter-based focus. I think that this depicts the increasing counterspace efforts of our adversaries and the threats they pose to our national security. Will you go into detail regarding the training to counter these threats and the transition to a warfighter focus?
Right. What I was referring to is the Space Mission Force construct that we have implemented in the wings. The 50th Space Wing is complete with this Space Mission Force transition. Currently, the 21st Space Wing and the 50th Space Wing are undergoing the same transformation. What this does in the Space Mission Force construct, for 4 months at a time, we have space crews that are in the fight. They're focused on the current fight, while the other portion of the crew force at these wings are focused on advanced training, tactics, techniques, and procedures development for the future fight and how they can codify those into their doctrine. So that's what I was referring to, and I'm really proud of the progress they've made and the way ahead. And General Raymond, some of that's in your OT&E lane.
I would also add it's broader than just space for space sake. So we are also integrating our space operators into joint exercises, into exercises called Red Flag, into war games that are joint and international. We've just developed a space flag construct. So it's developing depth of space expertise, but then also working the multi-domain integration piece, because this isn't space for space sake. This is integrating air, space, and cyber for the goodness of our nation, and we're tackling both portions.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Hanabusa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, I got to admit, when I see Air Force, I've been thinking about missile defense as well as your role in the triad system. And reading your testimony, it's raised a different set of questions for me. First of all, what I couldn't get past was this one paragraph, and if you could explain this to me. In your testimony, page 3, you talk about the first 7 months of your command, you aggressively pushed implementation of basically the AFSPC and the National Reconnaissance NRO Space Enterprise Vision with a new space warfighting construct. The warfighting construct is the framework for turning the space enterprise vision into reality. What I'm interested in is, what is this warfighting construct that you're talking about in terms of space?
So thank you, and it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
The space enterprise vision is, as I mentioned earlier, is the vision that's a shared vision between us and the National Reconnaissance Office, and I'll pass this over to Betty Sapp as well. But it's the shared vision for moving forward on how do you make the domain, our architectures more resilient to be able to survive the contested domain that we find today. The warfighting construct really talks about several things that we've talked about this morning. It takes that vision and builds a ConOps. How do we plan to operate together? And so that's the foundation of this, and we've worked very closely with the NRO to develop that ConOps so we know how we're going to work together. There's another layer that's also the part that we just talked about on developing and training our forces. The Space Mission Force construct is part of that. There's another layer on it, is how do you develop the partnerships that we need, both interagency with our commercial partners and with our allies, to be able to respond to the strategic environment that we face today.
Before you pass me on, let me explain to you why my curiosity. Because in Mr. Hill's testimony, maybe I'll bypass Ms. Sapp, no offense, but to ask and to get to Mr. Hill, is his testimony speaks about the quote-unquote are threats that we hear about all the time in here, Russia and China. He also speaks about A2AD and the concerns that we have. And he says both will continue to pursue a full range of anti-satellite weapons as a means to reduce U.S. military effectiveness. So what I thought you were going to tell me about the war construct was that it was in line of that, in other words, where we think about the oceans, the lands, and so forth. This is another layer of, quote, war that we must be ready to fight. And quite candidly, I'm not sure when you have Russia and China that can undermine everything in terms of diplomatic, this nice kind of cooperation that we're all talking about here. I really would like to know, to the extent that you can tell me here today, what exactly does this all mean in terms of our military, and what do you need when you come to see us in order to fight that battle?
First of all, we don't talk about a war in space. We talk about a war that extends into space. This isn't space for space sake.
Is that something that's unrealistic? I mean, is it conceivable that we could actually have, quote, war in space? In other words, could our satellites be the first target? Because once you take out our satellites, you have basically destroyed our effective communication mechanism. So could they not be a first line of offense against us?
If you look at what some of our potential adversaries are talking about, they're talking about a full range of capabilities that range everywhere from reversible jamming of communication and GPS satellites like we have seen, all the way up to the direct ascent ASAT that we saw from China in 2007. Our posture is we want to deter that. We have no interest in fighting that fight. And as I said, one way to do that is to be prepared for it. The space warfighting construct develops the partnerships, the plans, the concept of operations, the training needed to be able to respond.
In the minutes, seconds that I have left, Mr. Hill, would you like to comment on it? Because it's your testimony that triggered my line of interest.
The point is, and I say in my 10th testimony, there's scant evidence that anybody is looking for a war in space. It is about the terrestrial issues that they have, political differences that countries have, and it is their conclusion that if they want a military option, they have to be able to act in space as well. And as you're suggesting, that could be early.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here and for just all you do for the cause of human freedom. General Raymond, just a quick, direct question. Do you believe it's fair to say that space has been weaponized?
I believe it's fair to say that space is a contested domain, and it's a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea.
Yeah. Do you believe we need a more robust defensive space sensor layer to adequately identify the latest and emerging threats to our space assets?
I think it's an imperative that we have a level of domain awareness that's required to operate just like in any other warfighting domain.
Mm-hmm. Should this U.S. space, should we treat space as a warfighting domain?
Space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea, and we need to treat it that way.
Yep. Should the U.S. develop defensive capabilities to counter kinetic attacks against our space security architecture?
It is an imperative, in my opinion, that we develop resilient architectures to be able to operate in the contested environment that we face today.
General Buck, do you have any thoughts on that?
Space is a warfighting domain. And if you look at the other domains, air, land, sea, they have defensive capabilities. They have other capabilities. We can't afford to treat space any differently.
Is it fair to say that some of our near-peer adversaries' offensive space capabilities have outpaced our ability to defend our space assets? And I might ask the two of you. I got you. It makes sense. All right. Do you see, and I'll throw this out to the entire panel, do you see value in establishing an annual capstone training exercise, sort of the equivalent of the red flag, only say a space flag event for space operators?
We have had our first space flag this year. Although it's nascent, We're having the conversation, and we're moving in the right direction. I see this first space flag as the first of many to follow. General Raymond?
I agree.
Sometimes
As I mentioned earlier, that's important, but there's the other aspect of it that it's got to be, how do you integrate airspace and cyber together? And how do you integrate it with not just airspace and cyber, with the land and the sea? And so there's other opportunities in addition to Space Flag that provides that capabilities as well.
And those are space-specific Schriever War Games. Those are the Global Series, on and on. The JSPOC and the NSDC participated in north of 70 exercises last year, integrating space into the larger fight. So I'm really proud of that effort.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll probably leave the rest of my questions for the classified session. Thank all of you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for being here today. I represent Vandenberg Air Force Base, and recently had the great privilege of joining General Buck on a tour of the facility, the JSPOC facility, in addition to other facilities there. I guess for my colleagues and just for me for it to sink in, you could never hear it enough. Could you share, General Buck, the contribution of the Vandenberg Air Force Base JSPOC to our national space strategy and capability, and perhaps close with how that relates, or what the nexus is to the new JSPOC in Colorado?
Thank you, sir. Good seeing you again. We have two primary command and control centers. At Vandenberg Air Force Base, we have the Joint Space Operations Center. In this operations center, we have our commercial partners on the ops floor. We have our allied partners, Five Eye partners on the ops floor. They're doing the day-to-day heavy lifting support to the terrestrial fight. When a combatant commander needs space support, space effects, they go to the JSPOC and they provide military satellite communications, precision navigation and timing, all those space effects, and they do it better than anybody else. The National Space Defense Center, located at Schriever Air Force Base, is responsible for looking up, protecting the space joint operating area, if you will. So JSPOC at Vandenberg in the current fight right now, support to the terrestrial fight. The National Space Defense Center at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado, responsible for protecting and defending the space joint operating environment.
Yeah, and I would pile on that today the JSPOC is the operational DoD space command and control facility, period, dot. And they do spectacular work. I've had the privilege of being stationed at Vandenberg 4 times. Second Lieutenant J. Raymond showed up there in 1984, and they are absolutely wonderful airmen and joint, not just airmen, but joint partners that keep that domain safe for all, provide a critical capability to all of the war fighters around the globe, and is the only operational DoD space center that we have today.
Well, it was extremely impressive, and I just want to thank General Buck for his being so hospitable and giving me an opportunity to interface with many of the troops and many of your command team there. It was a great visit. It was a great learning opportunity, and I just really appreciate what you do.
Sir, it was our pleasure. Thank you for joining us there.
I thank the gentleman. Chair would like to ask a few more questions before we go into the closed session. Talk a little bit about launch. General Raymond, how long do you plan to maintain the Delta IV? And I'd like for you to differentiate between Delta IV medium versus Delta IV heavy. And do you plan to keep the Delta IV heavy specifically until a new launch vehicle is certified? And if so, how?
Yeah, there's 3 Delta IV mediums that are left. The final launch that's for the Delta IV medium is scheduled in FY18. We have 7 more Delta IV heavies. 6 of those are national security space launches. 1 of those is a NASA launch, and there's an option for 1 more. Final launch will be in FY23, and we're comfortable that we will have a new capability online to be able to support the requirements going forward.
You just heard Ms. Sapp, him make reference to the national security payloads. How important is it to your mission to have the Delta IV Heavy or an equivalent available?
It's essential to my mission that they're available in the near term. And I tell you, General Raymond's mentioned the partnership between us in the NSDC and in operations. We couldn't have better launch partners than we do in the Air Force. They have taken care of our mission. We buy on their contracts. They made sure we had Delta IV Heavy coverage with a lot of transition margin to get to a new booster. So we have just been very satisfied with their support.
You heard General Raymond say that he believes that by 2023 we will have a replacement certified. I hope so too, but if we don't, do you believe that we should let the Delta IV Heavy go before we have an alternative certified?
I believe we have time to see how the new programs mature before we cannot go back on the Delta IV Heavy. I wouldn't carry it in the near term. Again, we've got them funded through launches in 2023, so we have some time here to make the right decision for the nation.
That was a lawyerly response. As a lawyer, I appreciate that. Separately, General Raymond, since the Air Force originally developed its strategy to invest in the development of commercially viable launch vehicles, there's been another new entrant in the commercial launch market. Earlier this year, Blue Origin announced that it has started to get commercial customers for their new Glenn launch vehicle, and maybe they will even compete for the launch service agreement funding. Has this changed your strategy? And do you think it's the government's role to build a new commercial vehicle, launch vehicle, if there are already being built by the commercial sector?
Chairman Rogers, it doesn't affect our strategy at all. Our strategy remains three things, as I mentioned: assured access to space, competition, and get off the RD-180 engine. Our acquisition strategy is flexible and it encourages multiple competitors for national security launch services. I don't see it affecting it at all, and we're not building commercial launch vehicles.
Well, what do you know about the BE-4's testing setback that we had in recent days? Was its power pack completely destroyed, and how does this impact your schedule?
My understanding, Chairman, is that Blue Origin has announced that they conducted a test that resulted in the loss of a power pack test hardware. Obviously, that mishap is regrettable, but it isn't unprecedented in the development of isn't uncommon in development efforts. I think this adds credibility to our strategy to make sure that there's multiple engines being developed. I think we have visibility, pretty significant visibility into ULA's processes, although it's ULA's final ultimate decision. And then once that decision is made, obviously the Air Force, as a significant customer of that launch service, will do its own independent review.
Excellent. Chair now recognizes the ranking member for any final questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, in your testimony on page 12, you mentioned that GPS-3 SV01 has been completed and is in storage, with an initial launch capability date set to occur in spring 2018. That struck me as a necessary mothballing of a perfectly good satellite. Why the delay?
There's a couple of pieces that we're still working on. One, obviously, we're working on making sure that we can command and control a GPS-3 satellite with OCX block phase 0, which will be up by then. And then also there's work to be done on integration work to be done with the launch provider that will launch that satellite.
Is this customary to have a year or more delay in launching a satellite?
There are satellites that have been in storage significantly longer than that. It's not uncustomary. We'll launch it when it's safe and ready to do so, and we can get it onto orbit, and then command and control it. And as I mentioned earlier in the hearing, that today we have a pretty significant GPS constellation on orbit as we speak.
So this is not an issue of assured access to space?
It's an issue of making sure that we can command and control the capability when it's on orbit, and then working the final details of being able for them to integrate with the launch vehicle provider that will launch it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the ranking member. The committee will now go into a brief recess as we move to a secure location for the classified portion of this briefing.